2 years ago, Americans watched in horror as a crisis unfolded at the Kabul airport.
She was tear-gassed and beaten.
Images of thousands desperate to escape Taliban oppression filled our news feeds. More than 80,000 Afghans made it to America. But the story didn't end there.
It was very cold. There was no power, no heat.
Who would help our newest neighbors? I'm Andrea Smartin. In Stranger Becomes Neighbor, you'll hear the stories of some remarkable refugees who left their homes and their dreams behind, only to start over from zero.
Their only possession was 3 blankets.
And you'll meet Americans who stepped up to help them.
You want me to come when you deliver your baby.
What can one person do in the face of an international disaster decades in the making? That's Stranger Becomes Neighbor. Find us at kslpodcast.com. Follow us on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else you listen.
In today's episode of Project Recovery,
for the first time, I finally said, I'm not going to live with this blame. I'm not going to live with this shame anymore. I'm not ashamed to say I'm the ex-wife of an alcoholic.
Make sure you listen to the end. Find us on Facebook at Project Recovery. We'll have that and much more coming up. Hey, welcome to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction, but more importantly, about recovery, and is brought to you our friends at useonlyasdirected.org. They got a 3-part solution for the opioid epidemic. It's speak out, opt out, and of course, throw out. A new one launching, Dr. Matt. You heard about it.
What did
know
you
your
say?
script.
Know your script. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, what, did you get lost in my eyes? I'm not wearing a hat.
Yeah, you're just so good looking, Casey. It's hard to follow you
but
sometimes.
One of these, so today, this morning, I've got a big day after this, and so I've got a lot of things going on, so I didn't wear a hat because I got to have, like, normal hair.
You got stuff going on.
Yeah, you know.
You're going to be on camera.
Yeah, I'm going to be on camera, but I'm looking at the back of my head, man. And like my older brother Yancey says, he looks like somebody took a piece of bologna and threw it on the back of your head. Look at that, man.
It's getting thin, man.
Right?
Sorry about that.
And I've also got a bone to pick with society.
Yeah?
Just
society, huh?
Well, and I think it plays into a lot of things. I think there's a lot of frustration in America right now in all things, whether it's politics, religion, recovery. There's a lot of people that are just shouting at the top of their lungs and nobody's listening. Mm-hmm. But my biggest bone to pick with people right now is telling people what they need to do.
Oh.
You know, that's what I don't get. I just had a meeting the other day, and I come across this all the time, and I talk about my recovery, and it's my recovery. This is what I'm doing to keep myself sober, to better myself, to provide for my family, to be a good boyfriend, to be a good son, to be a good, ex-husband, all the things that I need to do. I'm working on my recovery.
Yeah.
And I tell people what I'm doing, and sometimes they're taken back. I'll give you 2 examples. Last Saturday night, I DJ'd in a bar, and I was telling somebody about this, and they were like, is that a good idea? And I go, what do you mean? They go, is that a good idea, you being in a bar? And I go, I wasn't there drinking. I was there working. Right. I was playing the music. That's what I do. That's how I provide for my family. Mm-hmm. And right now, I need to get all the money I can because whether I liked it or not, I took 2 years off. So I'm kind of in a deficit.
Yeah.
And sometimes they question me. They go, well, I don't, and I know that it's.
So they're kind of telling you they don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
That's what they were saying.
And I go, well, I appreciate your concern. Mm-hmm. And if it was just concern, but they don't leave it at that. They go, well, are you, and I go, trust me. Listen, I'm 2 years sober. I know my boundaries. Mm-hmm. I know when I'm putting myself in dangerous situations. Like I'll go to parties with my friends, and at 11 o'clock, I check out because that's when it starts to get ugly. And I just don't want to be around that. And it's not for fear that I'm going to slip and take a drink, have a shot, sneak a beer or anything like that. Because right now, if I want to do that, I can do that anywhere.
Sure.
I mean, I can
go do it by yourself at home like you used to.
Yeah. I mean, I really could. I mean, I can go into Maverick, and if I want a beer, they'll sell me a beer.
Yes,
if I want to go to a bar, they'll give me what I want. Yeah. The reason I'm not doing it is because someone's saying, you can't. The reason I'm not doing it is because I don't want to.
Right.
And it's not in my plan, and it's not where I'm going.
But don't you think people might be concerned about just temptation? Like, I think that's that old adage is like, if you're an alcoholic, you probably shouldn't work in a bar. Like, it's too tempting to have that around. Do you think people are saying that out of concern, or do you think people just like to be nosy and in your business?
I think a little bit of both, and I think it's the people that are nosier in my business that I have a problem with.
Yeah.
But what if that guy likes those people, and the thing that's keeping him sober is working in a bar?
Because well, I think one of the things that keeps you sober is doing the stuff that's always made you happy. And DJing music has always been a big part of your life and makes you happy. Plus, it's a way to make money for you. I mean, it's a win-win, right?
And I'll tell you right now, everything better is sober. I can tell you that. My relationship with my kids, my relationship with my girlfriend, my golf game, my DJing is better. Everything is better sober. Even sex. I didn't know that was a thing. But sober sex?
Sober sex, you didn't know that was a thing?
It's a thing.
It is.
And it's amazing.
It's way better.
It's way better. The only thing better not sober is yard work. Because I've done them both, and yard work sucks.
I think it's good either way.
Yeah. But I'll tell you what, it's not better sober. The lines might be straighter, but other than that, and so I want everybody just to be cautious when people are doing their recovery. They're finding their recovery, and forcing your recovery on them isn't going to work.
So how should they? So let's break it down. Like if you were in that same situation, we go back, and what would be a better way for that person to show some concern? Like what would be a question or a comment that you'd appreciate?
I noticed that you're DJing in a bar. Is there temptation there for you? No, it's not. It's the way I provide for my family, and it actually gives me a reason to be there and be a part of and not feel like an outsider.
Right. Be with your friends.
Be with my friends and do that. And so
maybe take interest and ask questions like, how do you do that? Because for them, that might be too hard. They are probably projecting their stuff onto you, and they're thinking, oh, man, that would be too tempting for me. How does Casey do it? So maybe just ask, how do you do it?
Even my good friend Rob Eastman, we've had him on the show multiple times. He's got this quote, and
one of my favorites.
Yeah, he goes, you sit in a barbershop long enough, you'll get a haircut.
Yeah.
And I get where he's going, but that's his recovery,
right.
And he knows his boundaries. I remember, and I've said it before, I sat in the recovery process groups, and everyone's like, I got to get new friends. I didn't have to get new friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
My friends wanted me sober. Not once have my friends ever asked me, hey, do you want a drink? Here's a beer.
Because they were your friends, and
they're
they
my
wanted
friends.
to support you in your sobriety.
Yeah, they want me to be better, and they know that me being sober is a better me. And they applaud me, and they want me around them, and I've got true friendships with them. So I guess the thing is when you tell people what they need, don't tell them. Ask them.
There you go.
And I guess that's where it would go with it. Don't tell people what they need.
Yeah.
Ask them what they need and see if you can then be a help. But don't force your beliefs upon anybody, because I don't think that's fair.
Yeah.
And I think right now we're doing that everywhere.
There's a lot of that societally right now, and I think there's a lot of confusion about what is the right thing to do about some of these bigger, broad societal problems going on. But it really just comes down to your own life and your own relationships, and that's what you can control. And if you can stay focused on, understanding other people, then you're going to navigate these difficult social waters much better. And the best way to understand people is just to ask them about themselves and don't try to force things on them. I agree.
100%. And like I said, this is my recovery. It's working for me.
And you're doing great. I mean, I think that in my line of work, talking to people that are in various stages of recovery from time to time or in addiction, it's, I think, making a true commitment to this is a better lifestyle for me helps people then not be tempted as much. And I think that's one thing I've noticed you've done. And I notice when other people struggle, they haven't quite been able to grasp that concept in their life yet. But as soon as they do, then they start down the path of their own recovery, and it may look different than yours.
I can say with 100% certainty that right now, this is the best version of me that's ever been.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I can go back and I can talk about things that I've done, and I've done some wonderful things, and I was a good person back then. I'm a good person now. Yeah. But this is the best version of me that has ever been right now.
That's got to feel good
I love it.
Be able to say that. Yeah.
I mean, I'm balding and thinning, but other than that, I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah. No, and you still got the curls.
Debbie Worthen would say I don't have a 4-head. She'd say I got a 5-head.
Debbie shoots you straight, right?
Yeah. No nonsense. Hey, we've got a great show for you today. We've got Shelly Smith in, and she's here to tell her story. And your story's not really about your addiction because you don't have one.
Not anymore. No. Well, I do. I have a running addiction.
Wait, and you're addicted to running.
I do love running. Yes.
Ooh.
Yes.
The look on your face, buddy.
I know. I was like,
but
man.
I run through someone else's addiction, so that's probably why I run.
And we talk a lot about how a person's addiction affects everyone in their life.
Well,
right?
addiction is a family
disease.
disease.
It's a family disease. There you go.
And so I remember when I was in my addiction, and I'd have fights with my ex-wife, and I would say, "What do you care? I'm just doing it to myself. I'm not forcing alcohol upon you. I'm not doing any of this stuff. That's me. This is my body. I can do whatever I want with it." But I was selfish, and I didn't realize the impact I was having on my children, on my family, on my wife, on everybody. And so it really is a family disease, and the disease took hold. Right, Shelly?
Right, absolutely it did.
So let's get a little backstory on you. I know you and Dr. Matt went on a double date 20-some-odd years ago. You and Darcy.
I think it was 30.
30?
It was 30.
Yeah, I think it was 30.
Matt and I did not go on the date together.
I went on a date with her friend.
Uh-huh.
Have you ever had this probably never happened to you growing up, but one of those girls that you liked more than she liked you?
No, she liked you. They were just small town Morgan boys.
Yeah, so it was fun. I think the first time we met was at, did you say Corn Maze or
somewhere
something
up in
like
Morgan.
that?
Your church had a dance.
Something like that. I'm sure it was
Sock
just
hop.
a really great first date.
It was a fall event.
Yeah.
But you'd reached out to Matt and said, "Hey, I've got a story. I think I can help." And I think your story is one that can really resonate with our listeners and help, because it wasn't your addiction, but it was your husband's. So let's get the first backstory on you and go on from there. You grew up in Ogden?
I did, absolutely. And thanks for having me, you guys, because this is my story to share, and it's not his story. And the story really is for me that I want to tell women, or even men, if you're living with somebody who has an addiction, that person gets all of the attention. They get the energy, they get the money, and you sometimes take a
table crumbs.
You're down there. And I want to say to people, if you're going to stay, that's awesome. Give yourself self-care and give yourself the love and attention you need, because that addict's going to make you feel worthless, and you're going to have a lot of blame and a lot of shame. But I also want to say to the people, if you have courage to go, that there is life after living with an addict, and that you can. I love that you said, Casey, that you're your best version of yourself right now. So am I. I just keep fighting and growing, and that there's life after addiction. And so I want people to know that if you stay, just like you said, it's everyone's story. If that's your recovery and that's your process, stay and keep your family however you can. But if you choose to leave, there's a life outside of there. So yes, I'm Shelly. I'm from Ogden. I'm the mom of 2 adult sons, a 24-year-old and a 20-year-old, and I'm the ex-wife of an alcoholic.
And so when you first got married, everything was awesome.
Everything was awesome. So I grew up in Ogden. Well, my family moved around until I was about in 8th grade. We lived in the western states, and we settled in Ogden. I grew up, I went to Bonneville, and then I graduated from Roy. I went to Weber State for a year, and then I went on an LDS mission. And when I came home from my mission, you do what everyone does, and you're married within 9 months.
Yeah.
And then you have a baby within 9 months.
Checking all the boxes.
Checking the boxes. And life was good. We lived that typical, just middle-class, good version of ourselves life. Baby number 2 comes along 3.5 years later, and 6 months later, at the age of 27, my husband was called to serve as an LDS bishop. So we are living the perfect life, wouldn't you think?
You're the cover of Enzyme magazine.
We absolutely were, except for at that time I'd put on a little bit of weight. So, but I was doing the whole Mormon mom thing, PTA, community service. So my only flaw was I did have a minivan. My only flaw was I was a little chubby back then.
And do you
if
think
that's okay to say?
No, I think
is that a word?
What's wrong with chubby?
Yeah, this is
Is there
your
anything
story.
wrong with chubby?
No.
Thanks, buddy.
I was pretty sedentary, let's say that.
But did you think that affected your self-esteem? Or was that just kind of you thought, well, this is what happens?
Oh, yeah, this is just what happens. You have a baby. My youngest son was really sick. Spent a lot of time in primary children's. We were busy doing just church work and things, and I was baking a lot of casseroles and cookies for the neighbors. I was happy. Life was good.
Do you have a good funeral potato recipe?
I actually do, but here's the thing, and I don't even know if I should say. I won't say this because we might cut it. But
okay.
My boys, when I bake or cook now, they're like, "Mom, it's just not the same as when Fat Shelly used to."
I love it.
They throw it down, and I'm like, you know what? It's true because I don't take. I'm like, I don't know. I just there's just a little bit of more love.
Yeah, butter makes everything better.
I was like, and I would
100%.
taste it too, and so.
Yeah,
I knew
you got to
that
taste it while you
tasted
make
good,
it.
and now
Yeah.
I don't. I just am like, here it is. So,
And that sounds all great, but if that's where the story ended, you wouldn't be here talking with me and Dr. Matt.
no, it wouldn't. So what happened? My husband served as a bishop for 5 years, and then after his release, we decided that Morgan was where we wanted to make our home.
Because you were hoping to recapture some of that, that fall, beautiful Morgan experience. Actually, Morgan's a beautiful
But I feel like
place
you
to live.
lived there at the same time.
So I came home. I did. We crossed paths again. So we were pals our senior year,
Right.
through dating, and then of course I went on a mission after high school, and Darcy never called me again.
Wow.
So I actually had
She
to
had
ask
a
her the other
lineup.
day, like, whatever happened to her? And I came home, went to graduate school, came back, was doing a postdoc in Salt Lake, and decided I can't really afford to live in Salt Lake while I'm not making any money. So we moved the kids and everybody up to Morgan for just like not even a year. But in that year, I ran into you, I think, in the grocery store. And so we lived there for a little while you were living there.
Right.
Yeah.
We lived there for just the same thing, just a year. We realized it was kind of maybe a little small town for us.
Yeah.
We were in transition. What happened is we sold our home, and my sister's in-laws were leaving on a mission, and they said, hey, you can live in our house while you guys find a house or build or whatever. But in that process, we kind of realized Morgan probably wasn't the town for us. And at the time, my husband said, hey, I have this business opportunity that we can buy the franchise of the business that he'd worked for 12 years, and we can buy the St. George, Vegas area, and we can move. And I'm like, okay, I've just supported you for the last 5 years as a bishop and doing that. And I'm a stay-at-home mom. And I'm like, I just don't know that we're business owners. I don't know. But we were positioned okay financially because we just sold our house, had some equity. I'm a pretty good budgeter, so we had the finances to do it. But I honestly was like, this is going to be a disaster. He's a fantastic salesman, but he's not a businessman. But I was like, you know what? I'll do the business side of it, and we'll move to St. George. So we moved to St. George, and I will say socially, St. George was the best thing that happened to our family. My boys connected really well. My kids are baseball players, great community. I started running, took off that additional weight. And so I'm on this great trajectory, self-improvement, being this mom, everything. Jason's doing, we've got the Vegas area and we've got St. George, but it was kind of a debacle from the get-go. If something could go wrong, it did. But you just talked, Casey, about not being present when you were drinking. But when you're the wife of somebody who's drinking, you don't know they're drinking sometimes. You just know they're not present. So the way our business worked is Jason would stay 3 to 4 days down in Vegas, and then he would come home. And I'm doing the busy mom thing, not paying attention. But there were times I'm like, something's off. Something's not quite right. And so... But I never in my wildest was like, oh, I bet my husband's down in Vegas living kind of,
A double life.
a double life.
But why would you? I mean, he just come off from a bishop.
And for the
Right.
listeners who may not be familiar with the LDS faith, LDS people don't believe in drinking or smoking or using drugs. In fact, it's prohibited completely. And so if you're a bishop...
It's equivalent of a pastor.
Yeah, you're like a pastor, you're a leader of a congregation. And so those are typically people who are very, very strong in the faith, very devout. And so you being married to Jason, who was a bishop, I can't imagine it would cross your mind like, oh, he's acting kind of goofy. You wouldn't think about
Right.
drugs or alcohol or anything like that.
Right.
But you noticed that he sometimes wasn't present when he'd come back from his 3-day stay down in Vegas.
Right. And so one night he sat me down and he did admit to me, didn't say anything about drinking, but did admit that he had lost quite a large sum of money gambling. Oh. Well, at that particular time, our business, I'm telling you, it wasn't good. And so we were struggling. And so it was like, you know what, we've got to bail. Like, let's cut our losses right now. Like, I got it. We are going to lose everything. We put all of our money savings, and because of the little things that happened along the way, it would suck just kind of
It was a money pit.
any reserve. So we ended up totally losing the business. And mind you, this is 2008. So enough said about that
rough
too.
time,
So
yeah.
right. So 2008, and I say, let's go back home. Like I'm done. Like we've lost everything. Let's go back to my parents. We'll figure this out. And he was like, no, I'll find a job here and we'll kind of make it work. And we did for a minute. And again, I never, ever considered that he would be drinking. There was one time where I suspected it, And I said, I smell alcohol on you. And I'll tell you, that was the first time he led me to believe I was crazy. And then that carried over for the next several years. He was like, you're crazy, like full on crazy.
So the term for that is gaslighting, right?
Gaslighting.
Where you
He
try to make
gaslit
someone
me for-
else
right.
kind of think that they're the ones that
has
you,
the
it's-
problem.
Yeah, you manipulate their thought process.
Did he also have a gambling addiction?
No, I don't know. Again, this is because this isn't my story. Sometimes there's things that I'm like, I'm not really sure when and where all of this began. Because
But losing large sums of money, so gambling's
and
an
to
interesting
you,
thing.
it would probably be just minimal. To me, at that time when we had
well,
no
it's all
food
proportionate,
in
right?
my
Yeah, I
cupboards,
mean,
I'm like,
losing $100 under
Right.
those circumstances might be way
right.
too much.
But it was.
But if a
more
person
than 100.
continues to lose money and they don't stop their behavior, I would say there is some sort of addictive process, at least starting with
Right.
gambling. Gambling is one of those things where some people, I'm one of those, I'll admit. I'm not a gambler. I am too anxious for
Right.
it, and I'm
Me
like,
too.
I just lost $20. I could have bought a cheeseburger.
And I love it.
But
I do love
I know
it.
you love
Oh,
it.
I love it.
And so I think there was probably something, but drinking and gambling go hand in hand, right? I mean, you sit there, you get the free watered down.
That's the
drinks.
only way you get the free
Right.
drinks in a casino
Is you
if
sit
you're
down.
gambling.
Yeah.
And so I mean, and there's not clocks in there. There's no windows. I mean,
Right.
it's
You lose
a
time
recipe
and-
for disaster. I mean,
Yeah.
it really is. They know what they're doing. But you tell him you think you smell alcohol in his breath. He convinces you that it's not, and that you must be smelling something. And you said it went too far as gaslighting you, and that's where it began.
Right. But it kind of ends there for a minute. So we end up moving back to Ogden. We lose it all. But we move back to Ogden. We move in with my parents, and we're going to try to recover. He's going to go get a job. I've been a stay-at-home mom. I'm going to go get a little part-time
How old
job.
are you guys at this time?
Probably 35.
So that's a hard time in life to
Hard
start
time.
over.
My kids would have been like 11, and they're 4 years apart. So I'll let you do the math on that. 7, 8.
Sounds about
Well,
right.
not. I think they were like 9 and 12 because
9
they're
and
about
12.
3.5 years. Yep,
Okay.
9 and 12 when we came back here. Well, when we moved back, and I didn't realize losing a business to him, for me, I'm like, okay, we lost business. Let's go. Like, let's pick up and like. It didn't work that way for him. He struggled. He struggled with the loss of that business. He struggled. And I look back and I'm like, surely he was depressed. Surely we got back here and he just didn't really want to work. He didn't really want to find a job. He didn't, he got a job that was really below his income level and his capability. And we just kind of slid through for a while.
Well, and I'm not defending him because I don't know him, but it seems
He's a fantastic human being.
But
I'm
it
going to tell you when he's sober.
But it seems like a fall from grace, in a sense that he went from a bishop
Right.
to a business owner to losing it to have to move him back in with your parents. I mean, I can tell you as a man right now that would not only hurt my ego, it would make me depressed. And
Right.
so, I mean, I'm not justifying what he's doing, but I'm
No.
just trying to give you a little insight to what he was probably thinking.
I think depression for sure would be expected in that situation, but maybe even more so, like you said, your reaction to it, because you're going through all the same stressors that he's going through in a way, but
Right.
your reaction was to like, go, let's pick up,
Pull the
let's do
bootstraps
something
up.
new, right? Probably because the business wasn't part of your self-identity. But probably for him it was. I think for most people, we have things outside of ourselves that are intimately tied to our identity. And that often is our profession, who we are and what we do. And for him, maybe that was, I'm a business owner now, and then it fails. And so that probably took a big hit to his identity, or like you said, Casey, his ego.
So you guys are doing what you can, and you're just squeaking by. You're still living with your parents at this time?
Right. We lived with my parents, and I finally said, hey, we've got to get out of my parents' basement. It's, so we end up renting this little tiny duplex in Farmington. He wanted to live over by his parents, and that was great. We'd give our kids kind of a fresh start with things. And so we moved, and I thought when we moved to this duplex, you guys, it was a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom duplex. And we have 2 teenage boys that are sharing a bedroom that are junior high and, like a 9th grader and a 6th grader at this point. And I'm like, surely we'll move in here and he'll snap out of it. He'll be like, oh my gosh, this is not how we have lived in the past, Let's, and he didn't. But I knew there was a problem with our marriage because finances were hard. Things were just hard, but I never, ever again went back to that, like, he's got to be drinking. Like, I just never did. So I'm barking up all these different trees, like, something's wrong. And every time I would say, like, what is wrong? Like, what's wrong with our marriage? You're not here. You're not. I'm good. But he's sleeping on the couch and we're just disconnected. Well, we're driving home from my sister's house one day, and my sister has alcohol in her home. We're driving home. We'd been there staying all weekend because we'd watched her kids. And we came home and we're in the car and you're in that close proximity. And I'm like, you have been drinking. And again, you are crazy. You're crazy. So that's kind of where the story starts right there, is I start realizing, like, he is drinking, and he's drinking more than I think he's drinking. That's where the disconnect is. So you talk about your alcohol and you are with friends and partying and you're the life of the party. That's not the way he is. He's a private closet drinker. He only drinks by himself and he only drinks hard liquor. And it's a very, very private thing.
You're listening to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction, more importantly about recovery. We're listening to Shelly Smith's story. We're talking about her husband's addiction and how she handled everything that went along with it. Stick around. We'll be right back.
2 years ago, Americans watched in horror as a crisis unfolded at the Kabul airport.
There's desperation and anguish.
More than 80,000 Afghans have since arrived in America, but this story is still unfolding. I'm Andrea Smartin. In my new podcast, Stranger Becomes Neighbor, we'll find out what happens to these new arrivals in our communities. Who would help our newest neighbors? Follow us at kslpodcast.com, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen.
Welcome back to Project Recovery. Shelly, you said that's when it all started, and we're referring to your husband's drinking problem, but you assumed that she had been drinking prior.
Yes, I think that he drank like back when we lived in Vegas, but I think he kind of reined it in. And I don't know that it was a problem. I don't really know. Again, like I say, I don't know where it all kind of started. And because this is back in 2011, there's so much that I have buried, like the timeline. Sometimes I'm like, I don't even remember some of this stuff. But when I start to really kind of realize that there's drinking, because we are connected with the church, that we don't believe in it, and it's something that I know nothing about it. I don't understand alcohol. I've never drank. I mean, I've dabbled like as a teenager, like tried it and went, oh, that's not for me. So I call my sister, and I'm scared to death to admit to anybody that I think he's drinking, because I'm sitting in a pew on a Sunday, and then by Thursday, I'm like, there's something really going on. So I call her. My sister drinks, her husband drinks, and she's like, Shelly, it's just the culture that we're raised in. It's not a bad thing. Don't ruin your marriage over him drinking. Like, talk to him about it. Figure it out. Make it so that you guys can work through this and not ruin your marriage over the fact that he drinks. Be a cool wife. And I'm like, okay, what do I do? She's like, go to the liquor store. Like, find out what he likes to drink, go to the liquor store and buy it for him and be like a cool wife. So I sit down and I talk with him, and he's like, I drink Goldschlager. And I was like, what's that? And he's like, well, it's an alcohol that you can't smell it on me. It smells like cinnamon. So you've always thinking I'm chewing cinnamon gum. So I go to the liquor store and I am like terrified. I'm like, oh my gosh, if anybody sees me in here, I'm freaking out. So I go in there and then I find this Goldschlager, and it's kind of pretty. It's got the gold
Flakes.
But it's $25 a bottle. And now I'm mad because I'm like, we don't have any money. We're living in a 2-bedroom duplex. I'm not buying anything for myself ever. I'm working this part-time job.
And he's
you're drinking $25 liquor? But okay. So we get the brown bottle. And I go home and I'm like the cool wife. And he goes, you're not going to be cool with this. You're going to control me with this. And I'm like, no, I'm not. Like, this is cool. And he goes, I don't want the kids to know. And I said, oh, no, not on my dime. If you're going to be a drinker and you think this is like cool, it's going to be in our house and you're going to tell the kids. And he goes, no. Anyway, he takes it and he puts, I don't know where he puts it. I mean, I discovered it. And I leave and run some errands. So when I came back, I was like, I wonder where he hid it, because he wasn't going to tell the kids. So I look under our bed and there it is.
So he's not a very good hider.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But it's Wednesday at 4:00 in the afternoon, and a lot of it's missing. So I call my sister, and I go, okay, I bought it, and he drank some. And she's like, on a Wednesday at 4:00? Goldschlager? And she goes, I think there's kind of a lot gone. And I said, I don't know about alcohol. And she goes, okay, well, 1 shot is like 1.5 ounces. 2 shots, you're pretty good. And I go, I think there's more than 3 ounces missing. I go, I'm going to mark it. I'm going to pour it out. I'm going to pour water in it, and I'm going to measure it.
Wow.
No.
It's a scientific experiment.
I call her, and I go,
You remind me a little of Lucille Ball.
It's like CSI.
What is going on?
You guys, this is a big deal. And I call her back, and I go, okay, 32 ounces is missing. And she goes, 32 ounces? Where is he? And I said, he took the boys over to the church. They're playing church basketball. She goes, go get your kids. She goes, I think you got a bigger problem than what you know is on your hands. Go get your kids. And I go over to the church, and for the first time, I'm like, he's freaking sloshed. And I take my kids. I'm like, they're not going in the car with you. And then we spiraled. That was in March. And by May, spiraled. I called my dad and I said, from March to May, just so many things happened. He would leave, drink in his car, and I would find him totally passed out down at a particular place he liked to go, totally passed out. And then he would just sleep it off for 2 to 3 days. Finally, in May, I called my dad one day. It was the last day of school. And I told my parents, I said, my husband has a drinking problem. And they're like, what? And I said, come and pick me up. And they came and they picked me and my boys both up. And we took just the clothes that we had with us and we left. And I walked away.
I want to go back just a little bit because you said from about May, then it started to spiral out.
March to May, he lost his job for doing something that he was under the influence with, and his employer knew that had happened.
And then let him go. And during that whole time, would he feel bad about his actions? Would he say that he's trying to get help, or would he just blame it upon everything else?
No, it honestly was still, we were still kind of in some like denial, 100% denial, you know? So because he would be drinking and I knew it, we just avoided it. We avoided it. Only on the days that I would physically go pick him up and drive him home would he admit, and he was like, it's not that big of a deal. It's not that big of a deal. It's just helping me cope. But there was not a problem. He definitely did not have a problem.
So he said.
Right. Right.
Well, it seems like one of the things that's really in operation here is shame, right? Here you took your sister's advice, even though it goes against all the religious practice that your family had all along. And you said, I'm going to try to be the cool wife. I'm going to be accepting if this is something he wants to do now in life. But he was the one who wouldn't really embrace that. You tried to embrace it, and I'm sure that wasn't easy, but shame is something that really destroys a person and makes us kind of move inward instead of reach outward for help. And I that's my observation. Do you feel like
absolutely?
Yeah, and shame creates denial, and
shame
denial
creates denial, and shame creates lies. I mean, we all know that an alcoholic is synonymous with lies, but when everyone found out, when people, you know, his parents and my parents, there had to be a reason, you guys. There had to be a reason. You don't just go from being a bishop to a business owner to drinking. And so what was the reason you drink? Because you were married to Shelly.
That's what you thought.
Well, that's what he was. That was the story. I mean, that was the story. So you know, he goes to his family and he's like, could you guys live with her? Could you live with her? Wouldn't she drive you to drink? You know, she's this, and this, and I am. And so I'm like, gosh, why didn't you talk to me like all along the way? Why didn't those things that have been bothering you and building up, why didn't you tell me? But it was easy to shift the blame to me. And so, of course.
And that's what alcoholics and addicts are good at doing. They're good at pushing the blame and shifting, for sure.
And so, of course, I'm like, well, then of course it's me. I mean, here, there's a side of me that's going, wait, I was a really supportive wife. I do this as a bishop. I give up everything to go support you to do your own business, all of these things. But on this side, like I drove you to drink. But did you get confused by that? Did you feel like, well, gosh, maybe I am part of the problem for a little while at least? No, I knew I felt like I was part of the problem. I really went kind of down into my own, like I kind of don't have any worth. So that's kind of when I picked up running. My sister said, you either need to get on some Xanax or you need to come run this race with me. And I said, I'm not doing anything I'm not putting anything in my body. I'm watching what's happening with someone else who does. So I started running, and I just kind of ran through, and that's kind of for me what helped me at least maintain some self-esteem and some self-worth, because on this hand, I've got this human being who's not a kind drunk. He's just not. And so his words are mean and manipulative. And so for me, I'm like, oh my gosh, I drove this person to drink. And I love him. I love him. You have to understand that. Like, I love him. So I'm like, come back. Let's figure this out and come back.
Well, what's hard about that is in any marriage, things arise that are problems between the two people. And people who have healthy marriages and happy marriages aren't people who don't have problems between each other. They're people who communicate effectively and support each other and work through those differences and issues. They aren't people that magically don't have those. So it would make sense that if he's bringing up some of those complaints in the marriage now and you weren't aware of them, you might look at some of those things and say, oh, yeah, sure, I guess I do that, or I could see why he'd be upset. Unfortunately, he's, again, sort of gaslighting you by tying that to his drinking. So normal marital issues are going to occur, but when an addict says those are the reasons why I have my addiction, then it's hard to tease the two apart and say we can have problems in our marriage and they're not the reason you drink. But that's hard when you're the person being accused of that.
So before your parents drove to pick you up, you and your two sons, how did the rest of the family feel about it? Like, your son's inside the house. Did they know Dad was having a problem?
They had no idea. They'll tell you now. They're like, we heard fighting, but I did a very good job, and I thought I did a very good job just up until even recently, that I was like, I hid a lot from you guys, and they're like, but you didn't, Mom. So no, they did not know he was drinking. They knew there was marital strife. They knew there was discord. But when we went to my parents, and that's when I said, and again, for most people in the world who hear this are like, so what when you tell your kids like your dad's been drinking? But to grow up in the religion and the culture that we did, to say your dad's been drinking and this is why some of this behavior has been taking place, they were devastated, but could now kind of understand.
Let me ask you this. When you had your parents come pick you up and you were moving in with them, were you hoping that he would get his life together and fight for you and get you guys to come back?
Absolutely. I thought, oh my gosh, if he could just admit that he has a problem, if he could admit there's a problem, then we can make this work. Like it felt like it happened overnight because it really, by the time I really discovered it from the March to the May, it did spiral. But like I said, who knows how long this has been kind of feeding, you
still don't know the pattern.
I know that he drank a little in Vegas, and I know that he kind of dabbled here and there, but like, when did it just, one day you just woke up and drank an entire bottle
of Goldschlager.
And he can, just straight from the bottle. I think he's gone to a cheaper vodka, straight from the bottle, but
did he come back for you guys?
No, not in the beginning. So we separated, and my whole hope was like, we're gonna make this work. Like, he's going through a midlife crisis. We lost a business, we lost our home, he's just going through a midlife. So I kind of just gave him his space and worked kind of things through the summer. And by late August, early September, I went to him and I said, I'm filing for divorce. And he's like, no. I will do whatever it takes. I don't want a divorce. I'll do whatever it takes. Let's move back in together. I'll come move in at your mom and dad's house. We're going to work this out. And so I was so excited because he was finally willing to get some help. But it didn't last long. He moved in and he could not admit that he had a problem, and he would get help. He was really, really good. So he would go on these little benders, and they would be like these 3-day benders. And then he would feel really guilty afterwards. And I always knew afterwards, my kids always knew he was going to come downstairs. He was going to cry to them and apologize. I was going to get a clean house. He was going to go on a run with me, go to yoga with me, and read a book. So sometimes I was like, sweet. And my kids were like, house is clean. Dad's been drinking. So my kids just knew, like, Dad's going to. And there were times, honestly, I had my youngest was a 6th grader at the time. And there were times where he would just in the middle of the night just wake me up and be like, have you heard from him yet? Have you seen him? Will you call the police again? Will you call the hospitals? Will you,
That's
Mom, is
heartbreaking.
he back? And I would say, he'll come home. He'll come home. And he would. And he would. But that next spring, I just said, it's like, I'm done. Like, we have to be done. And so he finally left. He left my parents, and that's when we finally decided that we were going to finally divorce. I was going to file for divorce. At that particular time, because he was truly, I say it's probably not the nicest term, but he kind of turned into just a gutter drunk. And I always felt like if he was with me, he was at least better. You know, he was at least trying. But when he wasn't living with me, he just would kind of spiral. So I always felt this obligation. An obligation to him because I loved him, but an obligation to my kids because they deserved a dad. And he was a good dad when he was sober. My youngest son plays a lot of baseball, and we traveled a lot together. And he was a really good dad. And I knew that as soon as I left, life wasn't going to be good for him. And it wasn't. So we divorced. And this is kind of one of my stories that I'm coming home from being with friends. My kids didn't go with him very often just because he wasn't in a good space. But it was finally time. The courts now had said, like, here's your visitation. You know, we determined it. And previous, when you're just separated, you just kind of drop them off or whatever. We didn't have like a set thing. And I went out with friends one night, and I was so excited. I was finally like, okay, here I go. I'm single. I'm going to go out with some girlfriends and have a good time. And I'm coming home, and there's only one way into my neighborhood. And as I'm driving, I'm like, oh, somebody's getting arrested. And I was like, ooh, this is so exciting. There's like 3 cops and a canine unit. And I was kind of excited until I realized that it was my ex-husband who was getting arrested. And I'm like, oh my gosh, where are my kids? So I pull up, and don't do this. You don't pull up in front of officers when somebody's getting arrested. They're like, ma'am, get back in your car. And I'm like, hey, this is my ex-husband, and I just need to know where my kids are. Like, where are they? And this is really fitting for how it was. He just got out as he's getting handcuffed. He is screaming and profanities and telling the police it's her fault. If you knew her, you would know why I drink. This is all her fault. This is her fault. And so that was just kind of how it was. There was just kind of this blame. About 6 months previous to that, when I finally decided to divorce him, I just kept thinking, if he could just admit he had a problem, if he would get pulled over and get arrested and get a DUI, like, then he would know he has a problem. And the first time he got pulled over, the police called me, and they were like, hey, come and pick him up. And I was like, no, like, arrest him, like, give him a DUI. And when I went to pick him up, the guy was like, do you realize how much money I'm saving you by not arresting him? You're going to have an impound fee. And you're
I can tell you. I know.
Right.
Yeah, I do.
Right. And
you got the receipt still.
Then Jason is so mad at me because he's like, you're trying to convince this guy to arrest me. So we get in the car, and he's like, see, I don't have a problem. If I had a problem and if I was really drunk, he would have arrested me. So after that initial, initial getting pulled over, it did something for him. Like, it gave him more power. See, I'm not a drunk.
He felt invincible.
Right. If I was a drunk, that guy would have arrested me. See, Shelly,
it validated his delusion.
It validated. Yeah. So after the first DUI, my kids were just kind of done with him. Got a second DUI. I wasn't involved with him anymore. I finally cut my losses from him.
No, but when you pulled into the neighborhood,
oh my gosh,
where were the kids?
So the kids were I had a son who was a sophomore in high school, and then so I would have had a 7th grader and a sophomore. So I go over to his house, and my 7th grader had 2 friends there with him. They were asleep, and my sophomore was not there. He had his own car. So I wake up the boys, and I'm like, hey. They're like, oh my gosh, what are you doing here, Mom? And I'm like, and Kai knew, and I'll tell you, this is why he knew. I said, we're just going to come have a sleepover at Mom's house. So as we get in the car, Kai's like, Mom, Dad was drunk tonight. And I said, I know. And he said, it was so embarrassing. He took us to the movies and he was singing the whole way through. And I didn't know what to do. At that point, he didn't have a cell phone. And my older son knew he was drunk. And so he just left. Probably should have called me and said, go pick up, Kai. So I take these 3 little boys home. And as we're driving in the neighborhood, that's when his car is getting put up on the, tow truck. And Kai just is like, Did Dad go to jail? And I said, yeah, Dad's going to jail tonight. And so that's from there, we just we went through some court systems. My kids had a guardian in Adelaide, and they were not allowed to be with him until he got some help. So fast forward 6-7 months, I get a phone call from a therapist. And we really had lost, there was just not a lot of connection. And he said, hey, I have your ex-husband. He's in a rehab facility. And I don't think he can heal without you coming in and letting him say he's sorry. And he needs to see his boys. Is there any way you would come? And I said, no, I'm divorced from him. Yes, he can see my boys. Absolutely. I will bring my boys to him. And my boys were like, we don't want to go. We don't want to go to a rehab. So we renamed it. And Dad was at band camp.
We called it church camp.
Oh, church camp. Yeah, we went to band camp. I mean, I don't know why. We're a sports family. We don't do music. But apparently we were at band camp.
Uh-huh.
So he asked me if I would come. And I agreed. I took my boys and we went. And I had a therapy session with him, and Jason, for the first time, admitted things that I didn't know. I didn't want to know some of it. But he said he was sorry. And it was so refreshing because for a year and a half, he looked awful, previous to me seeing him in therapy. He looked awful. He was your typical alcoholic, And when I saw him in therapy, I was like, oh my gosh. That's my husband. Like, he's back. He's back. And so I immediately come home and I'm like to my sisters, like, he's back. I'm going to get back together with him. And they're like, oh, slow the train, Shelly.
Pump the brakes.
Right. Like, don't go down. And I'm like, no, my boys need a dad and I love him. And when he gets out, I'm going to support him. Mind you, he doesn't have a driver's license. So I want to be there for him because I want him to be able to work so he can provide for my kids because he hadn't provided any resources at that point. And so I'm like, well, I'm just going to help drive him when he gets a job, and I'm just going to be a support. My son, I said, played a lot of baseball. We traveled together. So for the next couple of years, he and I did this roller coaster of I was a support system, but I wasn't a girlfriend. I wasn't a wife. Just a very interesting dynamic. Till finally, we just kind of decided, you know what? Let's work this out. Let's get back together and let's make this work. And I said, well, I'm never going to remarry you. I will live with you, but I'm not going to remarry you. So I moved in with him on the notion of that he wasn't drinking. I knew he would have a slip or two every once in a while, but it wasn't anything big. Well, we moved in together, and shortly after living together, I was like, this is silly to not remarry him. He's my husband, and I was just trying to be prideful. I was going to be Shelly Smith and be independent on my own, Since he left, when I left without a dime and had no job, skills, and no education, I'd kind of taken myself to a new level. I went back to school.
Yourself.
Yeah, I did some things for myself that I was like, I'm in a good position. But then I realized if I didn't marry him, that I always had an exit strategy. That the first time he drank or the first time I was like, and I'm bailing. I'm packing my bags and I'm leaving. So I felt like remarrying him was going to be just that commitment that here we are.
And had he been doing things that made you feel like he had really changed? Like, was he fully employed?
Yes. So here's the
working
thing.
to get his license back?
Yes. So he had his license back by the time I moved back in. Those were the stipulations. Like, I'm not ever going to move back in with you until X, Y, and Z happens. You have to have a good job. You have to prove that you're not drinking. And like I was telling you earlier, Casey, he had the breathalyzer on his car. So I was totally confident and felt good about him driving my children. And then we had a breathalyzer in our house. And so if I ever questioned it, the problem was he traveled for work. And so he could travel for work and do his thing. And I never knew about it. I didn't know. I just was like, everything's good. So partially, let's kind of move back a little. When you remarry someone, when you've been divorced for 4 years, and it's a terrible divorce, and it's a terrible situation of just, you also have more people than just yourself when you're dealing with this. You have parents and siblings and friends, and everyone's like, you're going to work this out? Like,
and they had all supported you to be single and independent.
Yes, but then his side of it is, why would you go back to her? She drove you to drink, you know. And then my parents are seeing, and my family seeing, like, Shelly, you went through misery for the last couple of years. Like, you guys you had no money, you had no, you know, he's not kind, you know. There's all these things. Why would you do this?
Because you love him.
I loved him. And I wanted my kids to have a dad, and I knew that if I was around him, he would be a better person. He would be good. So part of rebuilding a marriage is rebuilding family relationships. You know, people weren't happy, and we had to work really, really hard to rebuild relationships with my in-laws and build relationships with people. And that was all part of it. And so when you say, did you get to reinvent yourself? You know, there were things when we separated that I'm like, oh, if those were things that I get to have a redo and get to be better at, I'm going to be the best wife this go around. Like, here's the things that bugged you. You know what? I'm going to fix those things. And so we did. We went into it. You fixed this. I fixed this. We came together. And we had a good marriage. We're friends. Jason and I get along really, really well. We have a lot in common. Good friends. But shortly after, we remarried. So this is why I was telling you about my parents and our families. When everyone said, when you guys get remarried, we have no problem with that. People were finally like, that's fine. But never, ever drag us back into this. Like, we've all just been through hell with you for the past 4 years. We don't want to hear about it. We don't want to know about it. These are your personal problems. They're yours. And I was like,
fair enough.
Yeah, right. I was like, and he's going to be sober for the rest of my life because I'm an eternal optimist. And I was like, he's never going to drink again, you know? But shortly after, we were remarried. And again, he had been drinking, just hiding it. But shortly after we were remarried was when he had another really bad spiral. And so here I was, and I was alone. I can't tell a parent, I can't tell a friend, I can't tell anybody, because that was my promise to them, that if I took back my own problems, I took them back myself. So for the next 3 years, that's what happened, is I suffered in silence. I was embarrassed and I was ashamed, and I never wanted anybody to know that my husband was an alcoholic. My kids, we all lived this secret. My kids knew he was drinking, and I knew he was drinking, but we would hide it from each other, so we didn't talk about it. We just ignored it. And there was kind of some rules that I would tell him, don't you dare show up to a high school game drunk. Like, everywhere else, we just kind of ignored it. And my family had no idea that I was living kind of back in this same situation in hell. So I've got this job. None of my coworkers know. People who knew, we'd moved now. We bought a house. We moved. My kids moved school. My oldest has graduated. He never lived with us again after we were remarried. In fact, he'll tell you this to this day. He said to me, and he didn't come to our wedding. He said, Mom, you're making a mistake. Don't marry him. Like, don't do it, Mom. Like, you're so much better than what you're letting this be. And I always tell him he has to write my dating profile, because he always tells me I'm a really good catch. And I'm like, well, write my dating profile for me. Anyway, that's a whole nother story. But he didn't come. And so it's just our youngest son and myself, and just a constant battle of his drinking that I dealt with all by myself, because I was not about to admit to anybody. I was completely, I just lived with a lot of shame and a lot of embarrassment that I would never admit that my husband was an alcoholic.
You're listening to Project Recovery. We're listening to Shelly Smith's story, and wow, there's a lot going on, and we want to get to it in just a few seconds. You're listening to Project Recovery. So, second marriage, same guy, 3 years, a lot of shame, some embarrassment, but it had to come to an end.
And this might have been worse because you're lonely now. You don't have the support. I mean, to me, it feels like this second go-around was worse than the first go-around?
In a sense, it was. My older sister will tell you no because she didn't get sucked into the drama
Oh, it
and
wasn't for her.
25 calls a day. But have you ever heard that, the term, alone together? That's totally how it was. I was alone together. It was lonely. We did a lot of avoiding, a lot of he wasn't present, a lot of not talking about it, those kinds of things. But what happened is my youngest son was being recruited to play college baseball. And so we were really, really kind of ingrained with that. And I wanted for every recruiting trip that we took and every coach that called, I wanted Kai's life to seem normal. I wanted them to see that they were not only recruiting a great baseball player, but I wanted to see them that they were recruiting a great kid who came from a great family. I didn't want anybody to know. So we went through the college baseball recruiting, and he made a commitment to play for Washington State University. And so we kind of got through that phase. So that was good. I needed to be married with him because I needed the financial resources so we could travel to these different schools and kind of make this happen. Well, at the beginning of his senior year, he kind of gets on the radar of Major League Baseball and kind of gets on the radar of the draft. And so I'm kind of planning my exit strategy of as soon as Kai graduates and goes away to school, like, I think I'm done. I'm done with this. But there's so much going on in Kai's world. And I don't want him having stress. I don't want him knowing. I want that every time he shows up for a high school basketball game that he doesn't have like stuff going on in his head from home life. So I'm protecting and I'm buffering everything. And I don't want him when he's in this recruiting process to have to worry about the challenges at home. And so I'm just doing a lot of like, make everything seem perfect, make life just seem like it is. Well, his senior year, he gets on the radar of these scouts, and we know that scouts are going to start coming to his baseball games. And he has his first game of the year down at Dixie High. And this is when I knew Jason had a problem, more so than just the occasional benders, not come home, clean my house, read a book. We were supposed to go for 3 days, and he said, I can't come. I've got to work. And I'm like, you never miss a baseball game. But I knew if you miss something, he is pre-planning. I have 3 days without you here that I get to drink. So I'm like, you're missing his first game of the season? Absolutely. Well, what happened was he's, of course, completely intoxicated by day one. By day two, he calls me and he says, I'm not going to miss his game. I'm going to fly in. And I said, oh, heck no, you're not flying in. You are sloshed. They won't even let you on a plane. You're not showing up. You are not going to be in public. You're not going to be around your parents. Nobody knows you've been drinking. I did tell his high school baseball coaches the year before. I finally said, because he was showing up at games, and I wanted them to know to protect and buffer when he was up doing whatever, yelling at a fence or whatever, to just buffer Kai from that, because that emotionally, he didn't need that, So I said, your parents are here and nobody knows you drink, and you're going to show up intoxicated at his high school baseball game? No way. Well, I'm sitting there, his parents are sitting next to me, and we all three get a group text. I look down and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what we're doing. And it's this lengthy text that says to his mom and dad, Shelly's a saint. I have been, had a problem for the last 3 years. I've still been drinking. She's carried this burden alone. I'm showing up tonight at the game. I want you guys to know that I'm coming and I am intoxicated. But you guys need to know that this is where I'm at.
Whoa. Warning text, huh? Wow.
This literally, you guys, this is me. I see that we all three get the same thing, and I bolt out of the stands. I'm like, I can't deal with this right now. I am not going to deal with his parents right now. We took forever to rebuild our relationship. They are fantastic human beings, the best grandparents ever, the best parents. But it took some time for us to restore some trust within each other. And here we are. So they walk up to the stands and give me a hug, and they're like, we had no idea, and we are so sorry. And I'm like, it's okay. I got this. It's totally fine. I pick him up from the airport. I was terrified because to be alone in a car with a mean drunk is not the best place to be because you're confined to a space. But I just pretended. I was like, no, I know you're not drunk. I know you haven't been drinking. Let's just get to the baseball game. And then what I did is I told a couple of people, and so we buffered him from any scouts because I was like, this is a reflection of my son. Do not let him around these people. Do not let him near the dugout because my son's about to pitch and he doesn't need to be in his head. So we just kind of had this little strategy to keep him away. But that was when I decided, as soon as he graduated, whether he chose to go on to Washington State or whether he went through the draft, that I was leaving. But I didn't go.
You didn't go.
I didn't go. So what happened is we went through the draft process, and it was super cool. It was the coolest experience. Kai got drafted in the last round with the Kansas City Royals, but the money was terrible in the last round, and so he chose to go to Washington State. So he graduated high school. He actually graduated. This is pretty cool. His graduation day was on the day that he was at a pre-draft at the Kansas City Royals. So the Kansas City Royals let him put his cap and gown on, and he got to stand on the mound, and we took a picture of him while his class graduated, and he got to do that there at the stadium. So that was fun. He graduated, and 6 days later, the draft happened. He decided not to take the low money, and he decided to go to school, and we left 3 days later. So here's what happened. So that happened in March he admitted to his family. So then I kind of started telling my family, Jason has a little bit of a problem, and people were shocked. I didn't tell a large circle. I didn't tell the severity, and I didn't tell a large circle.
What, 3-4 years he hadn't been drinking?
Yeah, they thought for sure for 2 years. They thought for 2 years they didn't know he'd even touched it. They were just like, my older sister, every once in a while, I would say, he drank again. And she'd like, it's okay. She'd work me through it. And then I wouldn't tell about maybe every 6th one, that I was like, don't tell anybody. Don't tell. So again, we're going to Washington State. This is like the culminating thing. We've worked for this since he was 8 years old. He gets this scholarship. We're going to Washington State.
Super
we're
cool.
dropping him off. And he's like, I'm not going to go with you. And like, you're not going to go with me to take our son to college? No, I've got a lot going on. No, you don't. You want to drink. You want 3 days of drinking. It's the addict brain.
Planning for the opportunity.
Planning.
Yeah.
So we go up. I drop him off at school. Really awesome experience. And I come home and I'm ready to pack I called my sister and I said, it's here. I'm leaving. I am finally going. And what happened is I came home, and when I walked in my house, just the disaster that I walked into of throw up everywhere and him completely passed out. I thought he was dead on my couch. So I walked in and I was like, oh my gosh, he's dead. And please don't take this wrong, but I was like, halla freaking Luya. Like take me out of my misery. And that's a terrible thought to have, I know, but I was like, I am done with this. But he wasn't dead. And that's a good thing in all reality. But he's like, I said, we got to get you to a hospital. And he said, don't take me to a hospital, but I need you to, I've got to get help. Like, I'm finally willing to admit I have a problem. So that's where the codependent, the caregiver comes into rescue. I'm going to rescue you. I'm not going to leave. No way. I'm not leaving you now.
What kind of person would I be if I left you like this?
Right. You need me. And I'm going to be here for you.
And you've been waiting how many years to hear him
finally admit that I have a problem. That I have a problem and I'm going to do better and I'm going to get some help. So he never, ever, ever got help. He just wouldn't. He never went to AA. He hates AA. I don't blame him. He never would go to counseling. He never would go, but he at least kind of would clean my house, read a book, go for a run.
Yoga.
And he would at least appease me for long enough. Well, at that particular time, my oldest son, who had not lived with us again, was moving back. Friends were changing leases. People were getting married. And he said, can I come live with you guys? And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm leaving. But I also wanted him to reconnect with his dad on a level that he never had. He hadn't lived with him again, you know? And so I said, yeah, come move in. And we'll try to now kind of be a family with Dallas, and we'll kind of try to make this work with Dallas, and we'll pretend that Dad doesn't have a problem. And that's what I did. But I finally, about a year and a half ago, finally, we had another situation. Kai was coming into town for the Utah series to play against Utah. And of all the times for Jason to just fall off the wagon and get intoxicated was not that week. And that's when it happened. He just kind of lost it. And I finally, I said, I can't stay. And it was really interesting because his work had offered him a job. And they said, we're going to give you a promotion and take you to Arizona. So he came to me and he said, will you come with me? And I said, absolutely not. I said, I think this is the perfect time at first I said, yeah, sure, that'll be fun. No. And then I said, I'm not going to. And so he said, okay. And he said, what about if we kind of take it and I'll go for a little bit and maybe you stay at the house and kind of maybe get a filler, maybe if you can get a job or whatever. And he drove off that day, picked up his stuff, moved. And I'd never said like, we're divorcing or I'm leaving you or whatever. But he left that day and I didn't hear from him. I didn't hear from him for 5 days. Didn't hear a word. And by the time he called, he was such a mess that that was when I knew it was 100% over. And I filed for divorce right then and there that week. And that's kind of when it got really sad for me and for my boys because of all the things that we have been through. This was a final. I wasn't ever going back. And when you lose those expectations of having that perfect family, and now not only do I have to tell people I'm getting divorced, for the first time in my life, I had the courage to say I was married to an alcoholic. And I had friends who were like, what? What? And then I would say, well, this, and this. And they would say, oh my gosh, that makes total sense. And for the first time, I finally said, I'm not going to live with this blame. And I'm not going to live with this shame anymore. And I'm going to worry about me. You think about when a house is burning and you're like, this house is going to burn down. And there's only a couple things that need to be saved. And I need to be saved. And my children need to be saved. And I'm going to run back in and get a few things that are key to me. And that's kind of what I did. I knew the house was burning and it was time for me to save myself and save my kids from this and run back in and get some things like tenacity and determination and grit and take them with me and take a few of the bad memories so I know I would never go back and walk away from it and spend the next year and a half. We spent the last year, we didn't have any contact with him. He got his third DUI. He got fired from his job, which took insurance away from my children and any financial support away. And I spent the last year and a half working on me and working through some things. And one of the things that is so important for me is forgiveness. And I have to forgive. I have to forgive myself for being hard on myself. And I have to forgive him because the addict brain it's different than the normal brain. I've had to work a lot on surrounding myself with good people, staying healthy, a lot of running and a lot of serving. I love to serve people and a lot of teaching my boys that we are not the victims. We're not the victims and our circumstances are not the best. I don't have the best circumstances right now, but I will never live in victim mode. And my goal is to help people to find strength within themselves and to find purpose to give back.
Out of all the podcasts we've done, this one's probably touched me the most because I see a lot of things that I put my family through during my addiction and some of the things that I've done that I'm so shameful for. And I feel so bad for it. And it's a lot what I use for my motivation to be a better person today. And I've seen when you broke down during this podcast and how much it hurt you and your sons and everything that you've come through to be where you are today. I'm in awe of the person you are. And I think those boys are so lucky to have a mom like you. And I think that your story is going to help so many others out there. And I mean, out of all the podcasts we've ever done, this one's hit me the hardest because I look at you and I saw my ex-wife in so many of those scenarios, and it breaks my heart. And I hope your husband finds the grit and finds the determination to turn his life around, because that's what this podcast's about, is recovery. But also, addiction is a family disease, and you're a perfect example of how this disease not only affects those that are addicted, but the loved ones of them. And I'm so thankful for you to stop and share your story with us today. And I know it wasn't easy, and I think you really are going to help so many people.
Well, I do want you to know we did spend a year without contact with him, and his dad reached out to us a couple months ago and said, hey, he's sober right now and he's getting help. And this is the first time I've ever heard the words come out of his mouth that he's an alcoholic. And my boys have a relationship with him right now. We always say that we love him from afar, and we have boundaries right now, but my boys are back. They hadn't talked to him. My oldest hadn't talked to him in over a year, and my youngest, it had been about 6 months. I hadn't talked to him in over a year, and we were able to reach out and just say, you know what, we're willing to be a support to you from afar. We want you to be healthy. We champion you. We want you to be the best that you can. And right now, you know, he's been several months sober, and it's fun for my boys to be like, oh, have you seen Dad? He looks so good. He looks like our dad again. And we always just say, you know what? So my youngest son, I was taking him out. He transferred colleges, and I was taking him to school, and he said, hey, Mom, Dad mentioned that he'd be willing to drive out with me. And he said, but Mom, that's something you and I always do. And I said, but you know what? Your dad's never had that chance because he hasn't been sober. And I would say, I think you should go with your dad, because I don't know we don't know how long your dad's going to be healthy. And I'm the eternal optimist. I want to think he's never going to drink again. I don't know. And so I said, go be with your dad and connect with your dad and have that relationship with your dad, and let your dad get to finally experience dropping you off at school and enjoy that relationship together, because it's so important that while he's healthy, that we get to be with him when he's healthy. And if he ever isn't healthy again, that's when we step back. That's when we set our boundaries. That's when we love from afar, and we just worry about forgiving and working on ourselves and doing what's best for us, and realizing that when we open up ourselves and be vulnerable, when we're willing to tell people, hey, we're not the perfect family behind these doors. We have problems. We have things. People all of a sudden are like, so do we. And people are willing to talk. I've had so many people come to me and share their stories with me that privately they would have never told me that, because they thought we lived differently. And now people open up to me, and I'm not ashamed of it anymore. I'm not ashamed to say I'm the ex-wife of an alcoholic. You know, it sometimes is a little embarrassing that I still live in my mom and dad's basement, but you know what? Financially, it kind of left us in a wreck again, you know, with some things that happened this last year with him again. And so I'm like, you know, it's not the perfect story, but it's a story to me of hope. You know, I don't know if you guys are mountain bikers, but this is kind of what I say. When you're mountain biking,
mountain biker.
Are you guys mountain
I was going to
bikers?
say, I don't know, man.
I've seen mountain bikes.
I mean, I
They're on
mountain
people's
bike
cars all
terribly.
over
I'm
the
a
place.
terrible mountain biker. I crash hard and often.
That's why I'm not a mountain biker.
Right, but when you mountain bike, you have to keep wherever your eyes go, that's where your bike's going to go.
Uh-huh.
And so I crash hard and often because my eyes like wander. I'm like, oh my gosh, squirrel, look at this. So this is how I look at my life right now, is keep your eyes, wherever your eyes are focused, that's where your life's going to go. And if I sit and focus on all of this story that I just told you, or we sit in the past, or we sit in victim mode, my life's going to stay there. But if I turn my eyes and my focus towards setting new career goals and setting relationship goals and setting health goals and running goals, if I keep my eyes there, I'm always just going to keep growing and striving and being the best version of me.
I say my addiction is going to be a chapter in the story of my life. It's not the whole story.
And that's, I always say, this is not how my story's going to end.
Nope.
This is not how it's going to end.
And I can't wait to see where you go, because you are amazing, you're energetic, you're vivacious, and you are determined, and you're resilient. And we love you so much. Thank you. Dr. Matt?
Well, it was 30 years. You had quite a story in between the last time we hung out, you know.
Lots changed in 30 years.
A lot has changed.
But I love your metaphor of the mountain bike and the burning house. And one of the greatest things people can do in life is forgive and be optimistic. I can tell that you are happy and in who you are now. It's kind of vibrating off of you. Radiant, that's a better word, here in this studio. And so thank you so much for being willing to come on and share your story. Because as a psychologist, I can tell you exactly what you just said is so true. When we open up and when we are authentic, it gives other people permission to open up and be authentic. And making those connections is what heals us, motivates us, creates happiness and contentment in life. It's when we hide away in our own space because we feel like we're not as good as other people, or we're the only ones with problems, no one else has problems. That's a lonely way to live life. And so I just so appreciate people like you who are willing to kind of break those barriers down, because I feel like everyone's waiting for somebody to do that, and you're doing that with your story today, and I think it'll touch a lot of people.
The opposite of addiction is connection. You've been listening to Project Recovery, a KSL podcast.
The contents of this program are for informational purposes only. The program is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, licensed therapist, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this program. KSL does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the program. Reliance on any information provided on the program is solely at your own risk.
I'm Dave Cawley, investigative journalist and host of the podcast Cold. Don't miss Cold's new Season 3, where I look into the unsolved disappearance of Cherie Warren, a woman last seen leaving her job at a Salt Lake City office in 1985. Police cast suspicion on Cherie's estranged husband and boyfriend, but never made any arrests or recovered Cherie's remains. Find Cold Season 3, The Search for Cherie, anywhere you get your podcasts.